Sonic Robo Blast 2 has been around for a very long time. Over 25 years in fact, which is a little ridiculous when considering that the developers are making no money off of this game, and as you are reminded of every time you boot up the game, are in fact losing it. A key part of the game's development history was the final demo phase, where Sonic Team Jr. was adamant that every new update would be the last. Look at how that turned out. But one member of the development team at the time, known only as Toaster, has managed to compile almost every act present in those early versions into a single map called Final Demo Zone, allowing you to relive that time period, but with the quality of life improvements we now enjoy. This is going to be an odd review, because this is apparently an extremely faithful remake of those early stages, so I can't really give any real criticism as to what the mod brings. Instead, think of this sort of like a review of early SRB2 because the game has certainly improved, I'll just say that. I think the most interesting thing about Final Demo Zone is that peek into how SRB2 has evolved. Obviously, some stages aren't present here, like Arid Canyon, Egg Rock and Deep Sea, but of the stages that can be played through, it's interesting to see what level design ideas have stayed basically the same, which ones have been modified, and which ones have been replaced entirely. The basic bones of modern Greenflower Mountain are still more than visible this early on, as is the case with Techno Hill Act 1, but from Techno Hill Act 2 onwards, it's clear that stages have been overhauled almost completely. Stage lengths have been increased, aesthetics have been overhauled, layout is far more intuitive than before. Much of that is likely down to the expanding possibilities made available with improvements to SRB2's engine, but there's stuff here that's also clearly just been improved as the dev's experience has grown. These later stages are less levels that allow you to run freely if you can learn their layouts, and more twisted labyrinths designed exclusively to hold your momentum at every turn of their slopeless corridors. While nothing is ever truly that hard, if this is very faithful to the original version, less physics were completely out of whack back then, I'd say the game has gone significantly more difficult. It's certainly infuriatingly obtuse, filled with level design problems that really should have been picked up on within 1 or 2 rounds of testing. Why are these steam jets not next to the wall they boost you up? Why is the damaging acids in Techno Hill Act 2 so deep, guaranteeing your death, but not before you have to wait until being unable to reach your rings? Why does the acid drain so slowly here? Who made the button in Techno Hill an obvious neon red, but then made the buttons in Castle Eggman, the next zone, innocuous pillars of stone? Who designed a Sonic game, then made most of the stages impossible to run through quickly? Is the only reason people play this version of the game just the novelty of it being a Sonic game built off the Doom engine? There are some interesting ideas here. I especially like Castle Eggman Act 2's design being built off of finding buttons in this last castle to open a final door, being a very open stage to accommodate for this. Although it's very obvious the developers didn't really know what to do to make the level difficult and just dropped enemies everywhere. I also like the extended stealth section with the turret in Techno Hill Act 2, although falling into the acid again just means instant death due to a lack of any way to get back up. I think that essentially encapsulates what has happened since the final demo days. Ideas have been modified to better fit an engine that has become significantly better equipped to fit a traditional Sonic game's focus on momentum, flow and platforming. Graphically, Final Demo Zone continues the trend set up so far of basically being modern SRB2, but far less polished. The base aesthetics are more or less there for every stage other than Castle Eggman Act 1 and 3, but far less detailed and generally quite a bit uglier than what we have now. Notably, everything is very square. Some of that can be excused on the lack of slopes, but more natural stages like Greenflower Mountain and the first act of Techno Hill could have done with some more variation in what cliffs and valleys look like. They don't necessarily require slopes, just some more dips and grooves in the cliff face to break up the texture. That's probably the biggest problem with Final Demo's graphics, a complete lack of variety in textures. Every surface is a sea of repeating squares as they reuse the same small pattern thousands upon thousands of times. Comparing it to modern SRB2, you can see that by just adding 1 or 2 more patterns to each wall, then varying the geometry of walls and adding some props, you have a significantly more interesting stage to look at. Musically, can you guess how it compares to modern SRB2? That's right, less polished, less interesting, etc, etc. I'd say that this is where Final Demo is closest to modern SRB2 quality wise, As while the music has definitely improved with the new set of remixes of these themes, these versions still aren't bad. I'm not a music guy, so these are very vague critiques, but I think these versions sound more compressed? Like there's a little less oomph, or maybe less subtlety as different audio tracks combine together. I'm going to play 20 seconds of the old and new Castle Eggman Act 1 themes, and hopefully you can see what I mean. More instruments, a bit more variety with how they come in and out. I think the old versions are still alright, but I think the new ones are a lot better and rather the kind of music you find in an official game release. So, Final Demo Zone is really very hard to review, both because I never actually experienced final demo versions of SRB2, so I can't truly say how accurate this is, and because the zone isn't very good. I mean, it's emulating a series of not very good stages as some sort of historical archiving, so it'd be disingenuous to try and overhaul them to make them better. Not to mention that would just leave you with the modern day versions of these stages. So, as I said in the introduction, let's see what the mod itself brings to the table. It remakes the title screen to emulate what it used to look like, as well as to lock away the modern versions of the stages, a great addition to make the mod feel more authentic. It teleports you between the acts in one giant stage. Some might argue that operating like this would open up opportunities for linking the acts together, but they're so disjointed I feel that would just look ugly. The music swaps to fit each act. Nothing to say about that, I just think these transitions are better and less noticeable than some others I've seen. Scoring the mod based off of these factors, as well as authenticity to the original versions of these stages, I'm going to give a 10 out of 10. I don't think the mod could really be improved at what it's trying to do, and I think it's a stage every SRB2 player could do with playing, if only to see how the game has evolved over the years. I hope you enjoyed the video, and ciao.